Hello and welcome to the second episode of a series of retrospectives which I'm currently doing on classic and obscure games on 8-bit and 16-bit platforms. The title I'm going to be covering today is an Amiga, relatively unknown Amiga game called Mr. and Mrs. from 1992. Before I kind of kick things off, looking back at the previous episode, I realised that I do sound very much like Father Fitzgerald, and so apologies if things did come across a little bit dry and a bit monotonous at times, and what I'll try and do is improve things as like the series goes on. So the game Mr. and Mrs. is a 2D platformer game which I first kind of played on the Amiga back in 1992, and at the time the Amiga wasn't an easy platform to get access to, so myself and my friends all had 8-bit computers and consoles, and trying to play on an Amiga you had to go to a dedicated computer shop which had them on the show. But I was lucky that I had an older sister who was 19 when I was born, so she was kind of almost like a second mother, and they picked up an Amiga, my sister and my brother-in-law, and I think they got the Cartoon Classics pack with Bart Simpson and the Space Mutants with its wonderful animated intro, and also Captain Planet and Deluxe Paint I think it had bundled with it. And it of course, definitely, you had Lemmings as well. How could I forget that? But it was amazing. When I went over there and they showed us this Amiga for the first time, I'd never seen anything like Lemmings or games like never saw anything like the animated sequence like in the Bart Simpson game. It was mind-blowing. And it was a great opportunity to actually sit down and play the games properly without getting kicked out of the shop or anything like that, or having to sort of hand over to someone else. So I was kind of lucky as well that my parents didn't have a huge amount of money, so we never got to travel really anywhere together as a family or go places that often. My dad did take me out places at the weekends for like McDonald's occasionally, or we'd go and get some games downtown. But we never really visited different towns or different places. And I think maybe my sister was aware of that, so what she used to do was she used to invite us around to their house during like half term and summer breaks, just to stay for a couple of days and get away. And I used to be able to hang out with my nephew, who was 6 years younger than me, and be able to sort of play with whatever toys or Lego that he'd picked up at the time, and also get the opportunity to play on their Amiga as well. So I'd be able to kind of go over, discover what new games they'd picked up, such as Swiv, Lotus Turbo Challenge 2 and Supercars 2 and that kind of thing, and it was really exciting. I used to be genuinely excited going over and seeing what new stuff they got. So around the time when my nephew was quite young, he used to have these birthday parties, and here's like a still from a video that I'm going to show you in a sec. That's me on the left supporting hair, which is quite a rare sight, and also some rather trendy Bart Simpson pajamas. So what I wanted to do for my nephew, so the cool thing about my nephew's birthday parties is that he used to have like lots of cakes that I'd get hyperactive on and that kind of thing, because I was a hyperactive kid. Used to go a bit mental on the colouring, and they used to sometimes have a bouncy castle as well, so you could play on this bouncy castle all day, as long as other kids weren't on it, that you would send flying or something if you jumped on it, because I was a bit older than the other kids. But it used to be great as well, because I could skip a day off primary school and go especially over to his birthday party. And when it was his 4th birthday back here in 1992, I wanted to buy Daniel a present for his Amiga. I wanted to get him an actual game, but budget games were quite expensive at the time. I think they were about $9.99, so the only thing I could really do with my sort of measly pocket money was to pick up a magazine, because that had cover discs on the front with a bundle of games, and this was the one that I picked up in a particular sweet shop that caught my eye. So it had 2 discs on the front. It was just over £3, and I thought, this is great, this is ideal, and this is what I ended up picking up. As you see in the video, I was probably a little bit of a cunning little shit, really, and I probably ended up buying a magazine for myself more than my nephew, knowing that at some point I was going to be playing those games myself. So it's a little bit cheeky, and you'll see a little bit in it now actually. So here we go.
me in the back. Like that.
For your computer.
You take them off and put them in your computer, Daniel. Play them. Take them off. Don't they set them up? You want to play them? There's a more Commodore one. There's one Amiga. Yeah? I'll put Amiga. Put Amiga power. There's some cheats in there. Cheats. Yeah, Bart Simpson kept playing it. That one.
Yeah. So I was a bit of a little shit. So I'd read the magazine, so I picked it up, and I'd already read through it, even though it's his present. The magazine wasn't in a cellophane bag, and I probably ended up picking the magazine because I like the look of the games in particular, and I wanted to play what was on there. So yeah, it was a little bit of a cheap move, but I was only 10 years old, and I did have good intentions. I wanted to genuinely buy my nephew a birthday present, and luckily my mum bought him a proper present from all of us, so that wasn't all that he got. But anyway, so that's what we ended up buying, and we ended up eventually playing the games after everyone went home from the party, and I was quite excited. I don't think I really kind of got on with the other games with my nephew. The Legend game was an RPG, which I wasn't really into, and the Aquaventure didn't really live up to what I thought it was going to be. But Mr. and Mrs. ended up being a complete surprise, really. I mean, it's one of those games that when you look at it on the face of things, it looks like it's been drawn by a 4-year-old with crayons. It's really basic, and it's one of those games that if you saw a screenshot in a magazine or on the internet, you'd probably flick past it and not think too much about it. But as with like most games that have poor graphics, if you kind of look beyond that, often you'll find 1 or 2 gems in there, and Mr. and Mrs. is one of those games which I highly recommend you taking a look at. And one of the reasons for that is, even though it's a standard flick screen adventure platform game where you sort of collect keys and open doors, I mean, there's nothing too new there. The big thing is that it kind of riffs heavily on a classic game called Head Over Heels, which was released by Ocean Software. And this was an isometric title created by John Rittman and Bertie Drummond, and it was very much heavily inspired by sort of isometric games that were done by the Ultimate Play the Game company. But the major difference which made this title stand out from all the other clones that were going on at the time was that you had these 2 protagonists that you could sort of flick between. So you had Head, which is the character on the left, who had the ability of sort of jumping high but couldn't run particularly fast. And then you had Heels, who could run fast but couldn't jump high. One could also pick up items with their handbag, and Heels could fire donuts with the donut gun, but the other person couldn't, and vice versa. And what would happen is you'd start the game and the 2 characters would be completely separate, and you'd have to kind of you wouldn't be able to kind of join them up straight away, but later on you could. And if you were able to join them up, you'd have the ability, you'd be able to combine their abilities, so you'd have the benefit of being able to run fast but also jump high at the same time, which allow you to kind of get past certain screens which you might not otherwise with just one of the characters. But at the very start, you were separated off. You weren't able to kind of join up early on, and you had to deliberately go down your own separate routes until you would find each other and be able to join up. I mean, of course, people who've played the game a lot will know there's a cheat that you can actually flick between the characters really quickly to get them to join up early on. But if you used to play it properly, you'd have to send Head down his own separate route and Heels down her route to get past these various screens, and eventually the 2 of them would meet up in the market and be able to combine up. But as well as that, on certain screens, it wasn't just about combining up and having that extra combined ability. You could have the 2 characters separated on a particular screen with a particular puzzle, and you can have maybe, say, Head moving this joystick to move a movable platform, which has Heels on top of it, who can then be moved to a particular part of the screen which you couldn't otherwise reach, and vice versa. And it was that kind of interesting mechanic, combination separation mechanic, and working together, which really made the game stand out and makes it a classic which is still enjoyed today. And Mr. and Mrs. kind of builds on that kind of idea and concept of having these 2 characters that you can flick between, and I'll kind of explain about how it works in particular for this game if I load it up now. Try and give you a little bit of action rather than just talking and showing static screens all the time. Okay. Okay, so hopefully it should be loading up. So this is a dump of the actual cover disc that I purchased back in the day. And if you're interested, the Space Invader game is also worth checking out if you download this disc. It's a great little sort of spin on Space Invaders, where you have your kind of invade your main ship in the middle of the screen, and you can rotate it around, sort of in an asteroid style with a rotating shield. It's quite an interesting spin and worth checking out. Anyway, eventually when the game loads up, we first of all get a shareware screen where we get asked if we can send some £3 or something useful, which unfortunately we never did because we didn't have any money at the time. So if you're reading this, Richard, then my apologies, and I'll quite happily buy you a beer if we ever catch each other at a retro event. Maybe someday. Let's have a look. Okay, right, so let's start the game. Okay, so the title screen doesn't really do much extra to kind of raise expectations or hope. It's quite garish, just like the game itself, but we'll give it a go and certainly give it a try yourself. In total there's about 7 levels in the game, and we're going to focus on the woodland title today, and I'm hoping I'm going to get through most of that level to give you a flavour of it. We didn't really play any of the other levels because we didn't get that far back in the day. It's only really recently that I've completed the woodland level, so we just basically used to play this first level to death because we just got drawn into it. It was something about the game which kind of made it just more than a standard sort of platform game, and it was that head over heels element which I think did it in particular. So as we can see, when we start, Head is kind of trapped in this, or not Head, sorry, get my games mixed up already. So Mr, the bald character here, is kind of trapped in this cage, and we can't move him or do anything with him at this point. So pressing fire on the joystick will change over to the Mrs character, who is free and able to kind of run around and do stuff. So this is where we kind of start the adventures. So first of all, we've got these snooker balls, things that we can pick up, and there's an interesting bonus element to this, and the way we collect these items is that you're meant to kind of do it in snooker ball colour order. So we pick up a red first and then follow that by the lowest colour. We then pick up another red and we need to get the next highest colour, and that allows us to keep increasing the bonus, which then gets added to our score, and we'll see that as we go along in a minute. So the big difference with the characters, so with Head Over Heels we had speed and jumping differences, but Mr and Mrs, they have the same capabilities in terms of running speed and jump height. The main difference is that Mrs is the only character who can pick up these keys, whereas Mr cannot, and Mr, in comparison to Mrs, is the only person who can switch on light bulbs, which is, I'm not entirely sure why, but throughout the game, and on this level in particular, there are 80 light bulbs which you have to light up to open up the exit, and Mr is the only person who can do this. So we need to be careful, and we need to have the right character in the right part of the game to be able to complete the task or pick up a key in the right place to open the door in the right place, and that's the main part of it. But in addition to that, the two characters do get to join up, and that becomes quite important to reach certain platforms or certain areas which we could not otherwise reach, and hopefully we'll see that in a little bit. So we've got this door that we can now open with the key, and we've got these switches that kind of open up the gates that we can walk across, and we'll see this a bit later on, because this is where the two characters combining go to good effect to enable to open up cages to allow the other person to come through. Okay, so we collect the next red ball, and the bonus continues to increase because we were expected to pick up a red as the next colour. I'm going to use this hook just to kind of reach this key. As you can see, the look of the levels is really basic. It's really very simple sort of block, shoot 'em up construction kit style block generation of maps, but it's functional and it does the job. And then with this underwater section here, so one of the things to mention is there was that door that I just went past, and I didn't use the key to open it, and for good reason, based on sort of experiences. And it's a slight flaw in the game, unfortunately, where if you don't do things in a particular order, you will find yourself get stuck, and you have to restart the game to try it again. That's one of the only flaws really that I have with the game. The graphics I can sort of overlook, but there are some poor level decisions where but I mean, some games back in the early 80s had that issue as well, and you just restart it and play again, and it seemed to be acceptable. And I think for a free game which is PD based, it's probably acceptable for this as well. The other thing to mention is if you want to play this game yourself, this particular screen that we were just on occasionally, if you don't get the settings for the Amiga emulator set up perfectly, you'll find probably that the game will freeze on that screen with the enemies on. So if you manage to get it past that screen and onto here, then you know that you've got everything set up correctly. Generally you just need 1 mega RAM set up and a standard Amiga 500 CPU, and it should be fine. Okay, so that high pitched buzzing that keeps getting higher and higher means that my energy is about to run out. I was a little bit slow getting past those enemies. Yep, there we go. Okay, so now I can open that door and get past the cage that I've opened. Now if I was to collect that green, we'll see that the bonus resets back to 0 because I've done it in the wrong order. So it's an interesting way of kind of building up your bonus and building up high score, I thought. So when we first played this game, one of the things that kind of stood out for me as well is that the characters reminded me, just using those switches to open up these drawers, the characters reminded me of these two comedy characters that I used to watch growing up. So there used to be a UK TV series called Bottom, which was on BBC Two, and it was written by Adrian Edmondson and Rick Mail, and it was about these two kind of sad loser guys who used to live in a flat together, and they used to beat 7 barrels of crap out of each other. And there's a character called Eddie Hitler, who's this bald character who and wore glasses. He looked very similar to the Mr. character in this, so I used to see this Mr. character and think that they were the same. And Richie, in a funny way, used to remind me of the Mrs. character. And in the series, they used to often make out that Richie was the feminine character of the two, even though they weren't in a relationship or anything like that. Yeah, so it's just a bizarre recollection that I have of those characters because it was of the time. So this teddy bear thing that we're about to collect now, so one of the interesting mechanics of the game is that you collect these teddy bears and this automatically changes your character over to the other character. And this happens quite frequently in the game and in the 7 levels that you have. So here now we've changed over to Mr. and we can wander over these light bulbs and start lighting them up to get rid of that total. Okay, so we should be getting near to the point where the two characters will eventually join up, and we'll see how that how they help each other out and how that helps you to get to certain parts of the level. So we're going to change back again. We can now free Mr. Now, I've always kind of thought, because of the simplicity of the game and how it looks and what it is, this would be quite a nice game to see sort of made or converted over to like the ZX Spectrum or the Commodore 64. I'd love to see this game. I think the mechanic, the head over heels mechanic within the game would really work quite well, and maybe someone could make some better design levels with better graphics or something quite easily to build on top of it, and without those kind of obstacles where if you don't do things in the right order you're completely stuck, which would be quite nice. There's potential to make a really nice game out of the ideas from this. So fingers crossed, if someone sees this, maybe this will give some inspiration if they're trying to look to do new titles. There's people these days, if you look online, who make brand new games for the Commodore 64 and the ZX Spectrum, and they get released in proper packaging just like the old days. So here's an idea, guys, if anyone fancies doing something a bit different. Okay, so we're going to change over again. These teddy bears we cannot collect. Not entirely sure what that is. It looks like some kind of lightning animation, which will kill you straight away if you touch it. Now we've got these. Oh. Okay, I'm not using the best control system for this. I'm using just a keyboard with WinVice at the moment. I need to get a proper joystick. So we need to be careful here, because if I was to kind of collect that teddy bear and not collect the key and open this door, I'd find myself stuck. So I need to open that door first before I do anything else. Otherwise I have to annoyingly restart the game. And now I can flick over to... I think I keep saying head and heels, so apologies if I have done that and missed it. So I've now switched over to Mister. Can get the light bulb to be able to complete the level. And pick up an extra life as I'm at it. I don't know why I cannot collect those items on this screen. It just seems to be for decoration. There's a couple of opportunities there where I could have easily got stuck in the game and restarted, so that it is a bit of a pain, and some people will get frustrated with that aspect of it. But I mean, I guess if this is a game that you're giving away pretty much for free, then you know, you could probably let those things slide a little bit. If it was a commercial title, then I think people would maybe get quite pissed off with it. I mean, you had games like Rick Dangerous, which had the unfair death scenario where you didn't quite see what was coming up ahead and you'd get killed off. So it was in commercial games as well. But anyway, so now the two characters have finally kind of met up. So we've got this rope in the middle of the screen to be able to progress, but we can't quite reach it. But with the two characters combined, you can sort of winch yourself up onto that character, so you can sort of get a bit higher and then jump up. And with the character still on the rope, we can use the other character to jump up, and they can latch onto that person. So then they can also climb up the rope as well, which I thought was pretty neat. It's something which isn't in Head Over Heels in particular. So here we get like an example of the two characters combining. So Mrs. will open up the first gate, and now I can jump over the top. Let's open up the third gate to let Mr. through. So here, another aspect of it, we've got this glue which you cannot jump on at all, but we need Mr. to kind of light that light bulb. So we can position Mrs. here, jump on her head, and then control Mrs. to walk across the glue, and then get Mr. to light up the light bulb. And we get a little sequence here with the two characters on the conveyor belt. Okay, so we're getting near the end of the level. So hopefully this has given you quite a good flavour of the game and will inspire you to kind of try and load it up for yourself. The other levels are quite large as well. As you can see, this level is particularly big, and the others are quite big as well. And at some point, I'm hoping to kind of sit down and properly play them as well. What would be really nice if the game had some kind of a level editor so you can make your own levels, and I'm sure it would be quite easy enough to do something like that. Okay, making a hash of that. I'm not entirely sure what those characters are. They look like some kind of cookie with a bandana on. It's very odd, some kind of ninja bandana. Okay, so I've missed something here. Okay, I've definitely messed it up. Okay, so that hasn't helped at all by changing the characters over there, so I can't collect the light bulbs, but that's fine. I don't think I'm stuck, so I don't have to restart the game. But I'm dangerously low on lives now. There we go. Damn it. Okay. Should almost be there now. The only thing I'm not entirely sure is I'm not fully sure if I can defeat the End of Level Guardian. Now I used to think that I knew how to do it, and it was to do with... So you'll see in a bit that this End of Level Guardian will drop these snooker balls at you, and the idea is that you're meant to fire them back in colour order to actually fire stuff back at them. If you don't collect them in the right sequence, then it just won't do anything at all. And when I used to first play the game, it took a while to figure out what it was actually meant to do. When I tried to play this the other day, the mechanism didn't work at all. Okay, so that's them saved. So we just need to get misses to the exit as well, and then we can start against the Guardian. There we go. Apologies, it's right, trying to do this live is a massive pain. Here we go. Right, so character's now trapped, and what I think you should do is you collect a red first, then use a coloured ball to fire back, but it doesn't seem to work. So I think I have to do red and then green. Or another colour. So I think I've got to do a couple. There we go. So it seems like you have to do it a couple of times until it starts firing back. So I can't touch another red, I have to touch a coloured one now. There we go. So it's quite an interesting little mechanic as well. I don't know how they come up with this idea. So maybe they were just a fan of snooker, I guess. And there we go. Okay, so I won't show you the second level. That's kind of a flavour for you of Mr. and Mrs. and I hope you enjoyed it. So I'm not entirely sure what I'll do for the next game. I'm fancy doing a VIC-20 game, so I might even look at a title called 3D Silicon Fish, which is a really odd game which works quite well. It has a few glitches in it, but it's another title which you might not be familiar with. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and hopefully we'll see you soon.